يا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على النبي الكريم محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, are there sisters back there? I'm not sure if there are sisters back there. If there are, ask for a mic so we can get you a mic back there so you can ask Ben Wagner and his staff any other questions that you might have. We want to thank the U.S. Attorney Ben Wagner for our region. This is Ben right here, and his colleagues that are here to visit us. I know we got Sean Vassar in the back, and I forgot the last name. George Anderson's here as well. Mark Collars is here. All right, Mark Collars is a really good guy. He's the chief out of Fresno, U.S. Attorney out of Fresno. These are all friends of ours and very good to our community. We've had very good relations with them. We've known Ben for nearly 2 years now. He's a President Obama appointee, and he's been so kind as to visit this community now 2 times. And he's had us visit them, their offices. We visited back in January, I believe. We had a roundtable discussion which went very well. And he also gave me the opportunity with a few of my colleagues on the Shura to go up and have a da'wah presentation for the U.S. Attorney's Office. I think there's a few other federal agencies represented. So it's been a good mutual relationship between us, the Islamic Shura Council of Bakersfield, the Muslims of Bakersfield, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. I really believe Ben Wagner is trying very hard to reach out to the Muslim community here and in the entire region. I really think that you really are doing a very good job. We feel very much that we have a friend in the U.S. Attorney's Office, not only with Ben, but with his staff. Elena Landau, the hate crimes, head of the hate crimes unit. She's always keeping us posted about everything, sending us emails. I have a few other friends there that I've gotten to know very well, and just excellent, excellent people. So without further ado, I want to introduce Ben Wagner, and we're opening up for Q&A once he gets done with his presentation. And Ben is very much willing for you guys to give him anything you have, and hopefully he'll try to answer those questions for us. So without further ado, Ben Wagner.
Okay, this is good. I'm going to just put that right on there. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me here today. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about, and Imam has heard this before, so I'm going to talk for a few minutes about why I'm here and my interest in this issue, and then would love to take questions or concerns or comments from you. One of the reasons that we are here is not just to talk to you about our viewpoint, but to hear from you about your viewpoint. And I'm very familiar with the hospitality in the Muslim community, but that shouldn't be a reason not to ask tough questions. So I look forward to that dialogue. So let me tell you first, for those of you who don't know, kind of who I am as the U.S. Attorney. I am the chief federal law enforcement agent in this part of California. As the United States Attorney, my office is a branch of the U.S. Department of Justice. So my boss is Eric Holder, the Attorney General. I was appointed in 2009 by President Obama to be the U.S. Attorney in this region. The district, we call it the Eastern District of California, goes from Kern County in the south up to Oregon in the north. And it is not the coastal counties, but everything inland from the coastal counties. So it is 34 counties. It covers about half of California. And what we are responsible for is enforcing federal law in that area. And so that has a couple of different components to it. It's on the criminal side, we prosecute violations of criminal law, federal criminal law. So that may be one of the things that we were doing here this morning is talking about marijuana cultivation in the rural areas. That's a violation of federal law, and that we charge and prosecute people for marijuana cultivation. But it's other types of narcotics transactions also, whether it's methamphetamine or what have you. We do a lot of gang-related cases, firearms cases, narcotic sales cases, violent crime cases. We also do, one of the things we kind of specialize in is fraud, white-collar cases. One of the notable cases that we're prosecuting here in Bakersfield is the Crispin Cole mortgage fraud case against a number of defendants. But we also have other mortgage fraud cases. We have other cases involving fraud in the agriculture industry. We also do national security cases. We do money laundering cases, cybercrime, child exploitation cases. Our district is one of the leaders in the country in bringing cases against child predators and internet pornography and those types of cases involving child victims. So we have a lot of different functions on the criminal side. Our prosecutor here, Karen Escobar, prosecutes primarily narcotics and violent crime cases. Kevin Rooney, who is sitting in the back there, is a prosecutor. He's the chief of our narcotics and violent crime section in our Fresno office. We have a Sacramento office, which covers basically from Stockton north to Oregon, and a Fresno office, which covers Modesto south to Bakersfield. And in the Modesto section, Kevin is the chief of narcotics and violent crime, and Mark Cullors here is the chief, and has been for quite a few years, is the chief of the Fresno office in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So that's what we do on the criminal side. And we also play a role as the government's lawyer in civil cases. So not only in those cases where we are trying to prosecute someone for breaking a criminal law, but also any kind of case in which the government, a federal government agency is sued, or we sue somebody, whether it is for damage to federal property, or maybe something involving the national forest lands, or maybe something involving Yosemite Park, for instance, or any of the military facilities here, or China Lake, or what have you. So we have civil attorneys who do that. One of the things they do is enforce civil rights laws and bring lawsuits to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act and other types of civil rights statutes. But let me talk a little bit about our engagement with the Muslim community. This is something which is has long been interesting to me, and Imad knows this, as we've talked about this before. My background, before I became a prosecutor, when I was quite small, I lived in Turkey for several years, in Ankara, and my sister has spent time there. My mother speaks Turkish, and so from a very young age, I was exposed to Islam and to the sound of the muezzin and the call to prayer and everything associated with that. When I was a teenager, I lived in Beirut, Lebanon, for 3 years, and I went to a school in which I was one of about 2 native English speakers, and all of my classmates were Lebanese, Palestinian, Syrian, Yemeni, Iraqi boys. Many of them were in Beirut for boarding school, and of course we traveled throughout the region, in Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Palestine, Israel, and down to the Gulf and to a number of other areas. So it was a period of my life which was very formative, of course, 13, 14, 15 years old, and I got very interested in Middle Eastern history, later became a history major, and among the things I studied in college were Middle Eastern history and culture. And then more recently, since coming to the Department of Justice in California, I spent a year in Indonesia from 2005 to 2006. We moved over there with my wife and my children, and I spent about 14 months working in I was the resident legal advisor, is what we call it. And what that is sort of a development. It's Justice Department to Justice Department assistance. And we worked with the State Department and the U.S. Embassy in kind of a foreign assistance type consulting role. I was not working on individual cases. What we were doing is working with the Indonesian prosecutors, something called the KPK over there, which is the anti-corruption agency. And I spent time, because I prosecuted corruption cases, so we spent time talking about that. They were starting up a new agency to prosecute corruption, so I spent a lot of time working with them on different ways to investigate and prosecute corruption. They also were starting up a new task force to work on what they call transnational crimes, that is, crimes that had connections in Indonesia but also in overseas. So those were terrorism, money laundering, cybercrime, and human trafficking, primarily, were the main ones. And so they had a new money laundering law there, for instance, but they had never prosecuted money laundering cases. We have a different money laundering law, but we talked about how to trace the money and how to prosecute those kinds of cases. So we spent a year over there, and again, spent a lot of time shoulder to shoulder working with my Muslim colleagues in the Attorney General's office there. So throughout my life, I've been in many, many mosques and enjoyed the hospitality that is always associated with those kinds of visits. But all of that is by way of saying that it just was a fortuity that I was already interested in issues involving Islam and the Muslim community in the United States, and some of the difficulties that Muslim Americans, I think, face in this country with negative stereotypes about Islam, bad information that is perpetuated in the press and in the public about Islam, and some of the burdens that imposes on members of the Muslim community. And of course, after 9/11, there has been, particularly because of the very strong law enforcement response to that event, for obvious reasons, there was a very strong response to that in the years immediately after. Whole new agencies like TSA and Department of Homeland Security were created that didn't exist before, and we engaged in what one writer called a turtling effect, kind of like when a turtle pulls in their arms and legs and hardens their shell. And of course, that created, I think, particularly for members of the Muslim community, who in many ways, I think, were not, that well integrated with some of the offices, like my office and other law enforcement offices. It created greater mistrust and a gulf between law enforcement, federal law enforcement in particular, and the Muslim community, which has been, I think, not helpful and not healthy and not productive either for law enforcement or for the Muslim community. So, fortunately, the events of 9/11 are more than 10 years behind us. Fortunately, we have not had a recurrence of that sort of an event here in the United States. I think this president and this attorney general recognize that there is a need to engage the Muslim community more closely, to have a dialogue, to build a more trusting relationship by having a candid exchange about what we do and what your concerns are for a number of different reasons. One is just good old-fashioned community policing and prosecutor policing with the community, which is we cannot do our jobs of being effective protectors of your rights and your safety if we don't trust each other, if we don't have a good relationship, if we don't understand your concerns, whether it's a national security matter, or more importantly, more likely, if it's something involving gang violence in the streets around here, or other types of mortgage fraud, which is one of the biggest things that we're doing, or civil rights issues, or whatever your concerns are. We can only do our job if we have a good communication. So it's important just from that standpoint. It's also important, I think, in a lot of ways that people understand what we are about as representatives of the government and of federal law enforcement. Because just as, when you have a gulf in communication and understanding, just as there can be negative stereotypes and bad information within law enforcement about the Muslim community, about Muslims, the reverse is also true. People in the Muslim community can have negative stereotypes and misinformation about us and about what we do and why we do it. And I think there's a lot of information, sometimes there's information that circulates in law enforcement about, misperceptions of Islam, and I think the reverse is also true. I think there are negative misinformation that circulates sometimes within the Muslim community about the FBI or our office or what we do, which is inaccurate and not helpful. Which is not to say that we are going to agree about everything. As is always the case, our job in general is to go out and catch people committing crimes and put them in prison, which is not, it's not the same as, it's not a picnic. That's a difficult thing to do, and it's not something that tends to create a lot of friends when you're doing it. But, so it's important to realize that there are going to be reasonable minds that disagree about things that we do. But I think it's important that we have, like every relationship, mature relationship, we have a good discussion. Oh, I'm sorry. What if I just hold it like that? Is that better? Okay. So, like every mature relationship among, trusting adults, I think there are going to be things in which we disagree about, but at least if we can have a candid, important discussion about these important issues and try to understand a little bit more so that we understand where you're coming from, you understand where we're coming from, then I think we've done a good job, good start. That may not answer everybody's concerns, but that's a big improvement. And I wanted to say just a couple more things before I open it up to questions. One is, I think, this effort at Muslim engagement is something that, as for the reasons I mentioned, is something I was interested in doing, and when I became U.S. Attorney, it's something I started doing anyway. Prior to becoming U.S. Attorney in 2009, I'd been in the office for many years. After 9/11, because of my background, because I was somewhat familiar, or more so than some of my colleagues in the Sacramento office with Islam and the Muslim community, after 9/11, I was asked on behalf of the person who was then the U.S. Attorney to go out and meet with people in the Muslim community, with leaders in Sacramento. So I became quite familiar with many of the leaders of the Muslim community up in Sacramento. Since 2009, when I became U.S. Attorney, and my role expanded to include this area, I was very eager to do the same thing here. But fortunately, this isn't something that is just about my interest. It's also, fortunately, something that is of interest to the Attorney General and to the President. So the Attorney General, about a year and a half ago, Eric Holder, asked the U.S. attorneys around the country, and there are about another 90 of them aside from me, to get more involved and active in reaching out to the Muslim communities in their different districts, recognizing that every district is different, Muslim communities are different in different places, they have different concerns, different relationships with law enforcement in their districts, but that the U.S. attorneys should get more active in bridging the gap that has existed over the years. And so about 30 U.S. attorneys agreed to be what we call the first wave, which means to immediately get out there and start talking with people in the community. This year, we've now broadened it to the entire country. So in every district in the country, U.S. attorneys are being asked to engage more with the Muslim community about whatever the issues are that are important to that community in that district. And again, different people are doing it in different ways. There's no formula, there's no objective, in the sense there's no end game. The idea is just relations like we do with other communities. I just came from a meeting with leaders in the Latino community in this society, in this community, in Bakersfield. So there are, it's normally part of what we do as U.S. attorneys, to engage with leadership in different communities. But there's a recognition that there's a particular need to improve relations and get more communication with the Muslim community. And in all of the unfortunate, I think, suspicions and mistrust that built up among some people in law enforcement and some people in the Muslim community since 9/11, I'm kind of an optimist, and my wife makes fun of me sometimes for being an optimist, but I think there's a silver lining in a lot of respects. There's been a lot of attention on Islam. There has been a lot of mobilization within the Muslim community to talk about Islam, to project, to engage with their surrounding communities about Islam and what they're doing. I want to applaud Imad for really being a leader in this area, in recognizing the importance of not just being in the community, but relating with other people in the community, whether it's law enforcement or other people, because the Muslim community is an increasingly important part of the American society all across the country. There's been a large increase in Muslims in America in the last 20 years. And yesterday, when I was in Fresno and I woke up in my hotel, I opened the USA Today, which I don't normally read, but they give it to you in these hotels. And one of the articles in it was this article in yesterday's USA Today. I don't know if you can read it, and the sisters probably can't read it back there, but it says, tally of U.S. mosques rises 74% in decade. That means in the last 10 years, there's been a 74% increase in the number of mosques in the United States. I haven't read the the entire thing yet. We were meeting yesterday with people at the Islamic Cultural Center in Fresno, and also Masjid Fresno near Fresno State. Somebody had already seen the study and is emailing it to me, so I'll read it. But the tenor of the article is somewhat positive in the sense that there's been a lot of attention to some of the incidents in places like Tennessee, where there was violent resistance to the building of a mosque, and there have been other places where there have been lawsuits and there's been harassment and resistance by the community, and that's a bad thing, and that's something that we in the Department of Justice want to vindicate your rights, because you have a right under federal law to build places of worship and to exercise your First Amendment, and there are statutes that we can enforce in that regard. But the good news is there's actually a lot of mosque building going on without any problems around the country, and a lot of expansion that's going on. And the tenor of this is that really things in many ways are looking up and looking better. A couple other things I wanted to say. We brought with us, we created some little information, these three, we call them trifolds, these little pamphlets that are information about our office, and Sean there has some, and we can leave some behind. And we'll leave them behind, and it's information about our office, but more importantly, it's got information that you might find useful. It has sites to websites, information about fraud, information about employment discrimination, information about education and bullying in schools, about hate crime investigations and prosecutions, how we do that, and about TSA and travel-related events, and other information that you might find useful. This one is in English. We also have one in Arabic. We've translated it into Arabic. We are working also on a version in Farsi and one in Urdu, but we don't have those done yet. But English and Arabic we do have here, so I would welcome you to take some of those, or we can leave them here with some of the other information that you have here. I just wanted to touch on a couple of specific issues that have come up lately, and then I'm happy to talk about other issues, good or bad, things like the unfortunate thing that happened in Afghanistan last week. The Defense Authorization Act, I know, is an issue. There are a lot of things that are worth talking about. But one thing in particular I know is on some people's minds, so I just wanted to bring it up, which has to do with training, law enforcement training, and particularly the FBI. And as many of you probably know, there were a number of articles in the newspaper over the last 6 months about information that was included in FBI training materials that had negative stereotypes of Islam or of Muslims, negative information that was in some cases offensive and should not have been included in those training materials. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what the FBI has done about that, sort of how that came about, at least my perception of how that came about, and what I know is being done about that. After 9/11, there was a huge demand by law enforcement, local law enforcement everywhere in the country for information about Islam, in particular militant Islam and terrorism coming from the Middle East. That's something which in places like Kern County, was just not on the radar screen before for law enforcement. And so for a lot of them, not very well informed about Islam, there was an insatiable demand for training to get information about this. Like, what is the story with this Al-Qaeda thing? And what is Islam anyway? And a lot of demands for information. And there was a rush to fill that void with training. And in the sort of pell-mell response and the request for information on that, a lot of people, this happens a lot in life, a lot of people set themselves up as trainers or experts or what have you to try to fill that void. And a lot of it, of course, was not carried out. There's not that many, certainly in law enforcement in this country, there's not that many scholars on Islam, not that many people who have a lot of experience in the Muslim world. So there was a lot of training that was put out there that was not well vetted, was created by people who probably had no business getting into the training business. In terms of the security aspect of it, I mean, that's fine. And in the defense, the FBI, I think one of the things that should be clear is that the materials that we're talking about are usually a very, very small percentage of the overall training. So there may be, you know, a 3-hour presentation on national security issues, and in the middle there's a couple of slides in there with offensive or stereotypical material. For the most part, we're talking about not stuff which was, I think, intended to be insulting, but things that in the course of training that was put together wound up being offensive and never should have been in there. So what the FBI is doing about this is they have set up a sort of a task force of individuals, which includes people from inside the FBI and people from outside the FBI, people who are Muslim and Muslim scholars, and people who are law enforcement specialists and training specialists, to go through all of this training materials that the FBI has used over the last several years, and to weed out both the training materials that are inappropriate and to identify people who should not be giving this training and make sure that they don't give training in the future. The FBI has apologized for this, and I think they're kind of embarrassed about it, as they should be. As I often say, a little embarrassment once in a while is a good thing because it makes people change their ways. So they have been apologetic about it, and they are making changes about it, which is not to excuse it. Shouldn't have happened, but in any event, going forward, I think they've learned a lot of lessons, and frankly, other people in law enforcement, in the Department of Homeland Security and other places, have learned lessons about this. One of the reasons I bring this up, though, is because even though I think this was something which has happened in the past and which is going to be corrected in the future, there are going to be more newspaper articles coming out, I predict, I assume, in the future about this same issue. And the reason is because there are some lawsuits going on with the American Civil Liberties Union and other groups who have sued the FBI and other agencies to get training materials under the Freedom of Information Act and so forth. And I know the FBI is continuing, as they've gathered these materials, they're reviewing them, cataloging them, and sending them out. And they're not concealing anything. They've been ordered by the court to produce this information, and they're doing it. But they didn't produce that all at once. So it's going to be coming out again next month, and the month after, and the month after, and the month after that. So I am guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that the ACLU and the other people who have requested these materials are going to write things about them, put them on their blog, talk about it, and it's going to come up again and again and again. So I just wanted to say that so you're aware of that, so you don't think that this is all new information or it's still going on. I think the FBI is taking responsible steps to address that, but it's something which we're going to continue to see in the future. So I think I've talked long enough, and I am happy to answer questions or questions to Mark or to anyone else that are here about things that you're concerned about, or things that you want to know about us or what we're doing, or things that we can be helpful with.
And sisters, when you want to ask a question, just let us know. We'll sit down or something, and then start with your question. Brothers, just go ahead and get some questions for the U.S. Attorney, and for Mark and the others. First question.
If you don't ask questions, I'll keep talking.
That's right. I'll ask the first one. I'd like to know if you can talk a little bit about Okay, the sisters want to start. Go ahead.
Okay, hello. I have a question regarding employment discrimination, and I want to know how is that being handled, especially, like you're saying, because of the lack of information and the knowledge that people have about Islam. Especially with Muslim women, people are afraid to hire us in governmental agencies, jobs that we may be qualified for. So how do we deal with that? I mean, in a most appropriate way, in a friendly way, because we need jobs too. American citizens qualified, so how, and what's your recommendation on that?
That's a good question, because there is discrimination out there, and I know that Muslim women, particularly those who wear hijab, are probably sort of on the front lines of dealing with that issue. So it's not an easy one, and we want to be of assistance kind of in an informal way, and if necessary, through the power of the Justice Department and litigation. So to the extent that we can help by talking about discrimination issues, by addressing this publicly, talking to the media. One of the things we did in Fresno after meeting with the people at the Islamic Center, Islamic Cultural Center of Fresno, is they called in the media, and we talked to the media about these kinds of issues, about negative stereotypes and ways to combat them. So, I mean, informally we can do what we can. In terms of of actually pursuing remedies, I mean, my first recommendation would be to talk to an attorney yourself if you think you're the victim of discrimination. The Department of Justice does enforce civil rights laws involving religious discrimination, and there are a lot of, but the jurisdictional boundaries of those and what makes a case that we're likely to take is fairly confusing. We are particularly interested in what we call pattern or practice cases, that is, cases in which particularly a government agency systematically discriminates against people of a particular religion or race or whatnot. So certainly if you have multiple examples of multiple people, it's always difficult with one person because if you claim that you were discriminated against because of your religion, typically the response when you get into litigation is, well, it wasn't because of the religion, it was because of this or that or the other thing. And that's why what makes a better civil rights litigation from our perspective is what we call a pattern of practice case, where you have similar behavior by that agency as to multiple people who are similarly situated. So I guess my advice would be, number one, it's about education. One of the things which I try to tell everybody everywhere I go is there is a misperception among many people that Muslim women are less educated than other women, and particularly women who wear the hijab. There tends to be negative stereotypes about the education and sophistication level of those people. And one of the things that is objectively, it's in the Pew study, it's in other studies that people are aware of, is that the average education level of Muslim American women is higher than the average level of education of American women as a whole. So I mean, we try to promote those kinds of positive reinforcements to defeat those stereotypes and kind of wear down the barriers to discrimination. But in those cases where you think it is happening, I would first consult with an attorney, and that attorney may be in a position to advise you about contacting our office. Last thing I would advise you, if you're interested in this issue, the real experts on this, whom we work with on these types of things, are the Civil Rights Division, which is part of the Department of Justice that I'm part of, but they're kind of the experts back in Washington. And they have, if you go to the Department of Justice website, within that, the Civil Rights Division, they have information on their website about discrimination and about the federal laws that apply and how to, what remedies we can obtain and how they go about with litigation. So that would be a good place to, for either you or your attorney to look at if you're interested in pursuing that.
Hey guys, I'll let the one lead us.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
first
you.
of all, I would like to welcome you here.
I have another question. I would like to know, like, what are some of the,
Sisters, 1 second. We have one of the brothers asking a question. I know you can't hear him. I apologize. What we'll do is, as soon as we get one question here, we'll get you guys back on. Inshallah. Jazakumullah.
We want to thank Imam.
Brother, speak up so I
Yeah.
can hear you over here.
Yeah.
You want you to speak?
Okay.
And I'll repeat the question when I hear it.
No, I said I want to welcome you first and thank Imam for this opportunity to making the view to understand each other and have a relationship together. My question is, sometimes as Muslims, and I don't know if everybody has the same view, I don't know. Yeah, everybody. Sometimes as Muslims,
Brother, he doesn't listen.
so you speak it.
Does it work?
My question is, as a Muslim, sometimes I feel that I've been treated different than any other citizen. Okay, I'm an American citizen, and sometimes I'm not going to say where. Okay, but sometimes as Muslim people, we've been treated different than other people or other, American citizens. So what do we need to do? What can we do?
Okay. So the question was a little bit of a variation on the question we've heard before, which is, as a Muslim American, the questioner said he often feels that he's treated differently, and what can be done about that. So I have a couple of thoughts on that, to the extent they're relevant. One of the things which is, I'm kind of a student of history, and I know Imad, I think, has heard me say this before, but we're a country made up of many different religions, people who came from many different parts of the world, and we have a history of sort of taking one step forward and one step back when it comes to assimilating all of our different changes into the mainstream of society and getting acceptance for that. One of the things that I said yesterday when I was in Fresno is that the year after I was born, John Kennedy was elected president. And even though Catholics, Irish Catholics, have been in this country since the 1820s, really, in large numbers, I mean huge numbers, in 1960, President Kennedy had to give a speech when he was running for office to tell people that he was not going to take orders from the Pope, that he was an American first, and he was going to be the president for all Americans and not just for Catholics. And when he became president, Catholics everywhere, whether they were Italian or Spanish or Irish or what have you, celebrated because they were so happy. And I say that to remind people who are not conscious of that history that this was not that long ago. This is when I was a child. And today, I think 8 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic. And so the idea that a Catholic would have been seen as kind of a foreigner after 100 years in this country seems ludicrous, seems ridiculous to us, but that was the reality. But things have changed very quickly in the past few years, and that was the kind of breakthrough that, that made that happen. Today we have an African-American president, which again, 10 years ago would have seemed like that's distant in the future. And I think that is changing things. And I think in a similar way, that is happening with Muslim Americans. It's partly because of this. It's because there's a dramatic expansion of mosques and people are more visible. People in the Muslim American community have been very prominent in academia and in business and in engineering for decades. But now there are Muslim Americans in law enforcement, in my office, in Congress, in places that, 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been very rare. So that's not a very satisfactory answer for you and your experience right now. I'm just saying that, I think the progress of this, which is part of the sort of normal trend of history in the United States, is a positive one, and it's going to be a positive one for you. But to be a little bit more specific about situations, there are negative stereotypes among some people, and there are differences in the way they treat people in this country sometimes, whether they're Muslim, African American, Japanese American, whatever it is, and it varies from place to place. And really, enlightenment, I think, and education and engagement is the way to counteract that. One of the things which I think has become a wonderful tradition of Muslim congregations in America is making iftar dinners an opportunity to bring in people from the outside community and demystify Islam and get people used to it. And I think that's a great thing. One thing I will say, and this really bears on Muslim women in particular, has to do, because I hear this every time I go to speak with any large group of American Muslims, is about airports and travel. Because people get treatment all the time. And there's some parts of that which I think is in a little bit in the range. Remember I said at the beginning that I think sometimes there are stereotypes of us as well as stereotypes the other way. Of us, I mean the government, So TSA, and I know this only because I've done presentations together with, I don't speak for TSA, they're not part of the Department of Justice, but I've done some presentations with TSA, and one of the things that they will tell you is that it is generally the policy of TSA for security reasons. Again, the TSA has nothing to do with immigration and that sort of thing. They're all about security, getting onto a plane. They don't really care where you're going or where you're from. They're just about the security of the plane. So they are going to heavily scrutinize people who are wearing loose-fitting clothing. So many Muslims who wear traditional dress and women who wear hijab are going to get scrutiny, not because they're Muslim, but because they're wearing loose-fitting clothing. And that's also true of a nun, it's true of a Sikh, it's true of a cowboy wearing a big cowboy hat, it's true of people who wear really baggy pants, it's true of people who wear large jackets. They're going to get scrutiny because of the security concern that things can be concealed. And it's not the religion, it's the nature of the clothes that people wear. So, so that's something which I think many American Muslims, particularly Muslim women, feel, hey, every time I go through TSA, I get scanned. It must be because I'm a Muslim and they're doing it because I'm a Muslim. Well, it's not because they're a Muslim. It's because anybody who wears clothing that is not, that is so loose that it could maybe conceal something are going to get additional screening. So that's the sort of thing which I think there's a perception of discrimination that I think is not really discrimination, but it's true to say that Muslims are going to be, get more screening more heavily. Now, there's other aspects to that though which have to do with border patrol and people coming back and forth to different countries. That's different. Because the people at the Border Patrol, they have a lot of discretion to, they get about 10 seconds with everybody who comes through, and they have a lot of discretion under the law to ask questions, to look for suspicious things, and they don't know much about the person who comes before them, and they have a moment to try to decide if they're going to ask more questions or not. And in the last 10 years, there has been more scrutiny. If people are flying here from Yemen, for example, they're going to get more scrutiny probably than someone flying here from Argentina. And I think that's unfortunate. That's not really profiling because there's a rational basis for it, but it's going to have a disproportionate impact of people from people of Yemeni background, for example. But so that part of it I think is not unfair. But the problem is, of course, because it's a very subjective process about what you ask and how you ask it, there's going to be unprofessional behavior. There are going to be people who ask more private questions than is necessary. There are going to be people who are rude and people who don't conduct themselves very well. And that is something which, one of the things that we have in here is that there are ways to complain about that. And there are ways to, you don't have to put up with behavior which is unprofessional or rude. Which goes beyond what's necessary. You may not always get the answer that you like, but there is a process for complaining about it. And I know that those agencies who perform that function are trying to do a better job. And one of the ways they weed out good employees from bad employees is hearing from the public who are affected by it. Sorry for such a long-winded answer.
Sisters, before I ask you a question, I wanted to expand on it a little bit more. I'd like to ask either you or Mark to just comment on this, and it's an expansion of what the brother was concerned about. Just this morning I had a call from somebody who wanted to know, they came to the mosque and they go to people's place of employment asking this question, which is, what's your, where are you most, trying to find a question. Do you consider your allegiance greater to the Constitution or to Sharia or the Quran or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Of course, I went ahead and asked him his faith, and he was Christian. I asked him to believe in the Bible. He said yes, and God, etc. So I asked him the same question. And he paused for a while and told me the Bible and God. What I'm asking you is not so much the religious answer. What I want to know is there a right answer from your guys' vantage point for Muslims? Is there a right answer?
It may not be the answer that the questioner wants, but my answer would be, it's none of your business what my religious attitude is. Unfortunately, this hang-up that some people have about Sharia law, and unfortunately, we see sometimes in politics in this country, and we try to stay away from politics, but just observing politics, I know in Oklahoma, I think they passed some voter referendum to say that Sharia law, as if, Oklahoma was about to be turned into some sort of, the federally administrated tribal territories in Pakistan or something like that. I don't know where that's coming from, this issue, but it's driven by misinformation and paranoia, and unfortunately, in politics all over the world, sometimes the way you build yourself up is by creating enemies and targeting other people and trying to take advantage of that. So, in terms of questions like that, I think people really don't, most people in this country really don't understand Islam and don't know what Sharia is or how it plays a role, and they don't view it the way you do other types of traditional law, traditional Jewish laws, or traditional, Leviticus, the sections in the Old Testament that talk about the dietary rules and things like that. Those sorts of things, people assume, they take for granted that that's part of their religious practice, their civic and community behavior, and it's not it's not a recipe for restructuring the order of government. And people don't understand about how that plays out with Islam because there's just so little understanding, I think, of how these communities work. So,
If you could just expand
yeah.
in the sense of, do these Muslims expose themselves at all to law enforcement? If they see, of course, God in Quran, of course.
You know, they shouldn't. So the question was, for those who couldn't hear it, is do people expose themselves more so to law enforcement if they say they are loyal to God first, essentially, and to the Quran above everything else? I mean, they really shouldn't. Yeah, and then country, right? And they shouldn't because you know, it's an old saying among many people in this country. You know, God first, and then family, and then country. And I think most people, when they think of it in those terms, would realize that your approach is no different than everyone else's approach, or all other people who are religious in this country. But people don't think of it that way. So I think it's important to educate people about that, and they shouldn't. But stereotypes die hard, and we're going to try to do something about that. Did you want to add that?
Well, I just wanted to add, you know, as an African American, and you all know our history in this country, I think the Muslim community can perhaps learn something from the African American community in terms of it's all about educating the other, okay? It's all about educating others, and the Muslim community is at a crossroads in America now, where you are coming to prominence, you are coming to more visibility, you're becoming more integrated into society, and there will always be, as Ben mentioned, there is always going to be a segment of society that's afraid of that. That's because it's unknown, it's unfamiliar, and the key to that is education. It's outreach and education to your neighbors, to your community groups, to your schools. That's, you know, I think that's something, in my opinion, that would be real helpful.
I was going to add to that. One of the...
Over to the sisters, was that a question? You might want to tell them when you're ready.
Yeah, okay. Sisters, I'm ready. Shoot.
Oh, okay, well, you guys have been partially answering. I was just wanted to ask from the perspective of your agency, what are some of the ways that Muslims can try to help rid some of the negative stereotypes? And you guys start saying some things on outreach and iftars, but I think that would be helpful to know from your perspective, you know, how do you see Muslims, you know, lessening their negative stereotypes?
Well, you know, your suggestion is as good as mine, and I don't purport to be an expert on how to represent the Muslim community to the rest of the community, so I don't want to presume to have any better ideas than any of you would have. But one of the things that I'll just suggest, on this past Friday, I was at the Salam Center in Sacramento, which is a large mosque up there, and they were celebrating their 25th anniversary in Sacramento. And one of the speakers talked about the Muslim Speakers Bureau that they had put together in the late 90s, and they assembled a group of congregants, men and women, to go out, when asked, to go out into schools, to civic classes and history classes and those sorts of things, and talk about Islam and Islam in America and what it's like and so forth. And some of the people who volunteered for this job, who were members of the congregation, were not actually that educated themselves about Islam. And so with the speaker, this woman who spoke about this on Friday, talked about how she began setting up classes to talk about Islam and did greater research in it, and it was very much of a self-education as part of this process. But they received a lot of positive response from the community to that, and she said, of course, after 9/11, she talked about actually on 9/12, I think it was, she had been scheduled to speak in a class, and how it was kind of a very tense atmosphere at first, that when she arrived at the school, there was a security guard that met her, which she'd never had that experience before, and it was a little bit of a frightening experience. But she said then once she got to the classroom and started talking to people about Islam and their experience and so forth, it was like it, you know, like it had always been. So it's just one thing to suggest. I mean, I know that there are a lot of, when we met yesterday with people at masjid in Fresno, they were talking about a lot of the outreach activities that they're doing, and I mentioned the same thing with them, that there are, I think there is a lot of, in the schools, and in things like the Rotary Club, and these kinds of social organizations, I think it's probably just hasn't occurred to them, and it might be worth calling some of them and say, hey, would you be interested in having someone knowledgeable about the religion and about the Muslim community in Bakersfield come speak for half an hour about our experience and about our religion? And I bet we get quite a few takers. So that's one suggestion. Excellent.
I hate to interrupt you.
Yep.
Have time for probably one more question.
Yeah, a couple more questions. Okay, we have to. Yeah, yes, sir.
I'd like to know first, what's your name?
Ben Wagner.
Nice to meet you. My question is, first question, is were you here to hear the speaker today? Were you in the building?
I'm sorry, for which speaker?
Were you here today?
Oh, no. No, I just got here at about 2 o'clock.
Well, my impression is he gave a very, very educational, beautiful explanation about this religion, which is called the deen. The deen is the way of life, and it's the way of life of the one that was inspired to bring the message to mankind, everybody, men and women. So it was a fantastic coup behind the behavior pattern and the lifestyle, which is around the founder, Prophet Muhammad. And anybody that studied the lifestyle of this man will find nothing negative. He'll find positiveness in all levels.
Right.
Because we're only here for so long. You know what I mean? It may not be in your lifetime or mine, but eventually the brother mentioned about the Sharia. This is all from the Creator. This is not from a man. We don't worship a man. Allah is not a man.
Right.
Allah is a power, He's a force, and it's a, I mean, like to use the word he, because that's, you understand, a pronoun for a man.
Right.
Right? But Allah is a power, of force, and a spirit to me. And this has been set up for the whole entire universe, not just the planet Earth here. Everything that's out there and everything, because He's the life, it's the life giver. I'm more or less like referring to Allah as it instead of He. You see what I'm saying? We don't worship man.
Yep.
And this lifestyle that the Prophet brought, like I said, it covers all things and everything about your personal life here. You know what I mean?
I do.
And because it's the world of opposites. As Muhammad Ali said many years ago when he was the publicistic champion of the world, that this is a world of opposites. Opposite of hot is cold. It's a world of opposite of good, it may be not so good, right on down the line. So in the behavior pattern and in the lifestyle of the Prophet, we find no negative. Even though people, it's sort of like this country was founded on what they call freedom, justice, and equality, wisdom, knowledge, understanding, the home, security, and friendships, and all walks of life. But this only applies to a certain class of people. You know what I mean? And over the period of time. And another question I'd like to interweave with this one, do you investigate the Nation of Islam? The teacher is Louis Farrakhan. Do the FBI infiltrate, not so much infiltrate, but come in and listen to the things that he says? And he says things very wrong. Very wrong. But the thing of it is, he's not paid by no particular government agency. So therefore, the things that he says, the reason why he's not bothered is because he says the truth about the condition. You see what I'm saying? So therefore, he hasn't broken any law, and they don't have no reason to come and get him. And his teacher, who was Elijah Muhammad, and that was the time that I came around. I come out of what they call the first resurrection. And this was mainly towards black people in order for us to better ourselves as the style, from the style of Islam. And we learned to stop stealing, robbing, killing, and doing all of the immoral things. You see what I'm saying? That this country was deep into, coming from the highest level down to the bottom.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
I do. I do. And you certainly don't need to convince me about the positive moral example of Islam and of many walks of faith. I know it's a constructive, community-based religion. One of the things which I observed just from living in Muslim countries and visiting many non-Muslim countries is that in places like Jakarta, there is an extremely low level of street crime, violent crime. And when you compare that to, there's a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of, a lot of other problems in Jakarta, but I felt safe everywhere in Jakarta, and it's very different than some of the large cities in Asia which are non-Muslim. And I think, my mom is a sociologist, so our take on this is that that has a lot to do with the community unity of Islam, and that people look after their own, people don't kick out people who don't fit, people who are having issues with their family or with their society are looked after, and it promotes social cohesion and safety.
Mark said a moment ago, it's about education,
Yeah.
being educated.
Yep.
But when people really know behind the experience, this is your greatest teacher.
Yep.
The experience. So what I'm saying is that even you understand, me, would fit well into, you understand, this deen, this way of life.
Yep.
Behind you, a lawyer,
Yep.
a teacher.
Every time I see my friend Dr. Mitwali Amar, he asks me if I've converted yet, and I haven't yet. But he's still working on it. So. Yeah. Okay, Imad will work on me too. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we take one more question, and then we have to move on. Yeah.
We are getting in videotape, so there's
Okay.
rest of the community can see.
Great. Fantastic.
A couple issues that we still want you to cover.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
you guys, does anybody have a
Yeah.
question? Go ahead.
I have a question. I heard many times about 9/11. So I have heard twice at least on CNN from Jesse Ventura, governor of Minnesota. And he was asking the government that certain information about hitting Pentagon and some other places. And he was crying loud and talking to that interviewer that government is not giving the information, hitting and whatever. If you know something, a comment on that.
All I can say about that, and I don't know much about Jesse Ventura, thankfully, but
He was not arguing, right? He was a governor of...
yes, I know he was a governor of Minnesota. Yeah.
So you should know about it.
Well, I mean, I know who he is. All I can say about 9/11 is there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there, and there have been, the 9/11 Commission. There's been extraordinary public documents about minute by minute what happened, the communications, what we have learned, etc., about that incident. And there are a lot of people, no matter how much information you put out about it, there are some people who, for whatever reason, want to believe something else. And then you go to different places in the world, they believe different things. I know in Pakistan, for instance, a lot of people seem to believe that the Indian government was behind 9/11. In some places in Saudi Arabia, they think it was the Israelis were behind 9/11. So, and other places, Jesse Ventura and other people may think, it was Muslims in America were behind it. Everybody has a conspiracy, not everybody, some people have a conspiracy theory about it, and there's not much we can do about that. We can try to put out as much factual evidence as we can, but you're never going to convince people who want to believe something else.
Anybody else have a question?
I'm going to have to leave, so I'd like to excuse myself.
Okay. Great. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Yeah.
One of the back of the room there.
Yeah, as a Muslim, what's my right in my workplace? We pray 5 times a day. What's my right to access an area where I can do my prayers? And do I need to bunch out when I go to do my prayers? And do I have the right to ask for Friday off so I'll be able to do my Friday prayer?
Well, that's a good question, and it's very much of a balance. I mean, in general, you should ask for from time to exercise your religion, and I'm not an expert in employment law and these kinds of things, so if you're really interested in the details about that, you should talk to an attorney about that, because that really isn't so much federal law, much less federal criminal law, which is my area of expertise. But I will say that there's kind of a balance between what employers can require of employees and what they have to do in the way of respecting their religious tradition. So an employer does not have to agree to everything that the employee wants to do in terms of their religious practice, but the employer has to make reasonable accommodation so that you're free to exercise your religion. So it's kind of depends on the nature of the job and what's required of it. For instance, somebody who is an air traffic controller and has to be watching the planes at all time, if they're the only person on duty, it may be fair for the employer to say, I don't care, you cannot leave the position to pray if you're the only person there. So it leans very much against the exercise of rights. Other types of jobs, it may be much more possible to accommodate that, and so then therefore they should. So, and it's not an easy call, and sometimes there is a difference between what an employee wants to do and what the law requires them to do. And sometimes they're required to do things that they don't want to do, in which case you do have rights that you should assert to the employer. But again, it's a balance. It kind of depends on the nature of the job and how much of what we call an accommodation. That is, how much different treatment you're asking for from every other employee in terms of your specific needs. So I'm sorry, that's not a very clear answer, but it sort of depends on the situation.
You say that some of that is, there may be a precedent set through court, or somebody would take it to court and say, I have a right to do this, and if it wins in court, maybe they can send it.
That's right, that's right. And there are attorneys, I know you have an assistant deputy district attorney here who could probably point you to some attorneys who are more knowledgeable about that. But it's very much the local things that are decided in the courts, and there are precedents that have to do with different religions. One of the things that I mentioned yesterday, some of it is just, again, a matter of education. I know that at UC Davis, I was told recently that there was a problem with the cafeteria during Ramadan because they would close at whatever it was, 7 p.m. And they did not allow people to take food out of the cafeteria, and so during Ramadan, when people were fasting during the day and they could not eat until after sundown, students were going hungry. And interestingly enough, the Muslim students got together with the Jewish students, who sometimes have a similar issue on some of their holidays, and went to the administration and said, look, this is a religious, we're not doing this just for fun, for accommodation, to make your life difficult. This is a religious need that we have, and so you have to accommodate that. And they didn't have to sue, they didn't have to go to court. The university understood, and they made an accommodation during those periods. So, I mean, that's the ideal way to work these things out.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions so we can ask them our wrap-up questions? We have wrap-up questions.
I'm ready for the wrap-up question. Lay it on me.
Are you ready? Make sure that we, okay. The sisters, I think, are fine. The first one is, would you please comment on the National Defense Authorization Act that President Obama signed into law after much thought and whatnot? We're concerned about it. We'd like to know what it all means. And also, Mark, if he wants to add something on that, I'd like that as well. The other is, we don't really believe that when the FBI goes in and they send in undercover agents that are employed to pretend they're Muslims and to go about trying to see if there are extremists in the midst, and then let's say grab an 18, 19, 20-year-old and convince them that they should be extremists and take it from A to Z, where it's an FBI planned operation the whole time. Basically, this in-homegrown terrorism that the FBI has taken from A to Z, we in the Muslim community don't see this as a positive thing. We don't see it as something that benefits society or us, and I can't imagine you or me would want our children exposed to anybody trying to brainwash them. And the end of the story is this individual, as wrong as they were in their action that they decided to do or were convinced to do, are going to be in prison for life now. And we just don't see the positive in that, because the other side of it is that the individual, were they exposed to what we would teach them that's correct and good, that we may have saved them from any other of these bad things. But the idea is that exposure is coming from the FBI, not from Al-Qaeda, which is really concerning us.
Okay. Let me address both of those questions, and for the benefit of the sisters or anyone else who may not have heard it, the first is about the Defense Authorization Act, and the second is about FBI use of informants. So the Defense Authorization Act, which was signed after considerable back and forth in Congress last month, there's a section in it which requires that people who are captured in the course of military operations be placed in military custody. It purports to require military custody as opposed to prosecution in civilian courts. That is what we do. President Obama, in his signing statement, stated that this was an ill-advised provision, which in New York, where I grew up, that translates as a stupid provision. But he signed it with some reservations. And here are a couple of things which I think it's important to know that a lot of people don't realize. Because there has been, I think, a little bit of, again, the president did not support this provision, still doesn't support it, and it's not a good thing, but it's not, I think, quite as widespread as some people may realize. First of all, it only applies to non-citizens. It only applies to people who are captured during authorizations that involve a military operation of some sort, not the Bakersfield Police Department pulling someone over on a car stop. It only applies to people who are determined to be members of Al-Qaeda or an allied organization, some group that is known to be working with Al-Qaeda, and it only applies to people who are participating in or planning or carrying out an attack against the United States or its coalition partners. So the scope of it, in terms of who it applies to, non-citizens, Al-Qaeda or allied organizations who are planning an attack in the course of military operations, and importantly, and the only reason the president signed it is because there's also another provision, which is that the president can waive its applicability. One of the reason that the president was so opposed to it was that he thought it was improper for Congress to be dictating what is the best way to deal with any particular threat, and telling the president, who's the commander-in-chief, that he has to use a military tribunal system as opposed to a civilian court prosecution if it's determined that that's the best way to do it. So the compromise that was worked out in the end is that there is a waiver provision, and he can waive it either in individual cases or he can issue a policy talking about classes of cases in which it can be waived. So I'm not supporting the provision, but I think people should be reassured that it is much more narrow and much less likely to be used, certainly in the sort of civilian context in places like Kern County, than it was sometimes portrayed in the press.
So non-citizen, non-resident, I mean, it's not necessarily domestic, and it's non-citizen?
It only applies to a non-citizen. I think one of the problems in it is it doesn't define where the action is taken, where the person comes into custody. So I think the presumption is it's during military operations, and it's in the Defense Authorization Act, and we have separate laws that prevent the military from acting in a police capacity except in an emergency. So it's not contemplated that it's used, by a police power, and it's federal, by the way, not state or county officers, that sort of thing. So that's on that. And let me end it by talking about the informant issue and traffic. And I think this is an important issue. One thing is to understand about law enforcement and informants generally. People in the Muslim community have been very focused on, and I understand why, been focused on the use of informants in national security cases involving people in the Muslim community. But one of the things about informants is law enforcement uses informants all the time in every type of case. We use them in narcotics case every single day. When we get somebody to buy drugs or sell drugs, almost all of our cases involve some form of informant. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them do. We use them in fraud cases when we call up people who are committing fraud crimes and say, tell me again about that great real estate deal where you're going to offer me 20%. And we use informants for those cases. In income tax fraud cases, we use them across the board in all different kinds of cases. And frequently, the people that we sign up, when I say we, I don't mean my office, but I mean law enforcement signs up as informants, are not the most upstanding citizens that you can imagine. Because generally, the people who have credible connections with the targets that are being investigated tend to be people who are associated with them, maybe have committed prior crimes. I'm not talking about national security cases, but in narcotics cases or whatever, they've committed prior crimes with them. They are engaged in that activity, which is the activity that we're looking to investigate. And so some of the people are either people who have done those kinds of things in the past or exposed to it, or they know those people, they can get involved with it. So it's not always the most upstanding citizens, and that's why our investigations and our prosecutions, they never end with the informant. They begin with the informant. That's where you get some information or you get an introduction. But any good prosecutor will tell you that you do not want to build a case around an informant, because informants cannot always, you can't always trust what they're going to say. And I know Kevin is smiling back there because he's prosecuted a lot of narcotics cases and had to defend the evidence in trial. That's what trials are for, that's what defense attorneys are for, and Karen has too, and I have too. And so you always want to corroborate, you want to get other evidence from other sources to prove the totality of the evidence, not based just on what the informant said. And by the way, I know there's this case down in Orange County with Craig Montiel, I think, who was a former informant for the FBI, who is just exactly the kind of, and I don't know the person, I don't mean to insult him, but he's just exactly the kind of person that we're talking about. He has previous convictions for forgery, for grand theft, and now he's unhappy with the FBI, and so he's suing the FBI for millions of dollars, and he's saying all kinds of things. And the ACLU and other people are taking that as true. I don't know if it's true what he's saying. I suspect a lot of it is not true, or is exaggerated, because he has his own motives and he's bringing a lawsuit against the FBI and he's trying to get money. So, who knows where the truth lies in that. But so that's where we start with informants. Then the next important thing to know is about entrapment and about what you were talking about, Imad, about engaging people to talk about national security issues. Entrapment means a very specific thing when it comes to law enforcement. Because we use informants all the time, there's always discussion back and forth about committing a crime of some sort. That's what the informants do, and frequently cases go nowhere because the informant may talk to somebody and say, how about we engage in this drug transaction? And if the person says, get out of here, I have no interest in that, that case is over, and it goes away. And if you go back to somebody and continually try to say, oh, come on, you gotta do it, you gotta do it, you gotta do it, and you keep going back to them over and over again, and you wear them down, and they finally decide to do it, that is entrapment. In the law, that is entrapment. And prosecutors hate entrapment because that's how you lose a case. It's entrapment. And you don't want entrapment. You want people to talk about, in their own words, about what they want to do, but if it's the informant who is convincing somebody to do something illegal, that's not a good case, because that's going to be an acquittal. And every defense attorney knows that, and you can get a jury instruction to the jury that says if this person was entrapped, they should be acquitted. So, talking about the national security cases, and the case like the case up in Portland, the Christmas tree lighting bombing plot, and some of these other cases that you've read about around the country. When the FBI looks at potential threats, they're looking at a couple of things. They're not looking at their religion, they're not looking at how they dress or what language they speak. They're looking at, they have what they call a threat matrix. They look at what is their capability to do something dangerous and what is their intent. How excited are they about doing something dangerous? And if you're high on both of those things, if you have a high intent and a high capability, you're a very dangerous person. Because you're telling people you want to commit a dangerous act, and if you have the capability to do it, that person is likely to be investigated. It doesn't matter what religion they are, or where they are, or what country they're from, or what have you. But the FBI is also interested in people who may not have a high capacity, a high capability, but they do have a high intent. And the reason that those people they're not as dangerous, but they can still be perceived as dangerous because you don't know who else they're going to go to, or how they're going to develop a capability, or maybe they'll change their targets and do something else. But if they have strongly demonstrated that they have an intent to do something, that is likely to attract investigation by the federal authorities. And to get to what you've described, Imad, in the course of investigating these cases, as I said, while there's often a lot of back and forth between the agent and the target, in those cases which actually wind up in prosecution, I'm not aware of any case which has been dismissed or has been overturned in the courts because of entrapment. And that's because, although there's a lot of discussion between the informant or the agent and the target, the decision-making is always by the defendant, by the target. So in the case up in Portland, there was a lot of back and forth, and it's legal for an informant to offer help and say, if you want to do this, how can I help you? What do you need? What kind of weapons? I know somebody who can help you. But the decision about what the act is, where the target is always made by the person being charged. And that's why so many of these cases, which you read about in the paper, like in the Portland case, the person is actually pushing the button that they think is going to set off the bomb before they're arrested. And the reason they take it all the way to that is to show that, yes, there's discussion about it, but that person was very had the intent to commit the act.
Can the law enforcement agency initiate the idea?
They can introduce the idea, but they cannot, and they can offer assistance, but they cannot select a target. They cannot tell people. They cannot direct the activity. They cannot make the decision about to do it. And in every good investigation, there are opportunities for the target, for the defendant, to what we call withdraw. So there is always an opportunity. Nobody is going to be pressured into doing something that they didn't want to do, because that makes a bad prosecution. And we as prosecutors don't want to prosecute cases like that.
The worry we would have is if they believe they're working with Al-Qaeda, and some of these people also believe that if once they're working with Al-Qaeda, backing out could be a death sentence in itself. And so, I mean, that can even be used as a defense, literally.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, that's why this issue is getting really confusing for us, is if Al-Qaeda really isn't involved, and it's just the FBI, and we're dealing with a lone wolf situation, why isn't the community getting involved, leadership getting involved? We had a situation here one time, and we involved ourselves, and we involved authorities.
Yeah.
And the situation was diffused.
Yeah. And frankly, I mean, you know, our interest, we don't want to, we have plenty of people to prosecute. We're not looking for more people to prosecute. So the best, and this goes to when we talk to people about drug trafficking, about juvenile crime, about frauds, what have you. I mean, the best thing to prevent a crime and prevent a prosecution, obviously, is deterrence. People who know people, dissuading them from engaging in criminal activity, and that applies to all different types of crimes. So, you know, I urge you to be cognizant of that and to recognize. And I'm not, you know, I realize that law enforcement tactics, they're different. Every case is different. Every situation is different. And that's what trials are for. All of this information is always turned over to the defense attorneys, and that's what those things are for. But reasonable minds can differ on these kinds of things, and there are different tactics that can be pursued in different cases. But in general, it is not law enforcement's goal to entrap anybody. Number one, to target anybody just because of their religion. It's because of their intent to commit a crime that draws the investigation. And the FBI has rules, constitutionally based rules, that prevent them from opening cases just on how people sound or appear or their religion or their country of origin. They don't investigate religions, they investigate criminal conduct. So that's what they're looking at. And then secondly, they only want to bring a case against someone who has demonstrated that they want to carry out a crime.
Honestly, does your department in any way, shape, or form advise the FBI on how to go about it?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And I don't know if you want to add to that, but yeah, we are, the way we operate with the FBI and with other agencies is at some point very early in the investigation, they talk to us about a case. And the reason they talk to us is for a couple of different things. A lot of things that they need for their or they may need for investigation, whether it is a wiretap or a subpoena for some documents or bank records, they have to go to us to get that. They can't do that by themselves. And secondly is, if the objective is to maybe have a case that is going to be prosecuted by us, they want us satisfied that it was done right, and we know what the theory is, and that we've agreed with the way the investigation was conducted. So these kind of discussions about, you know, we don't necessarily in every case listen to every conversation or everything before we get the case. But in the course of the investigation, we have a lot, and this is true with DEA in narcotics cases, with ATF, in gun cases, in IRS, with tax evasion investigations, with all these types of cases, we have these kind of dialogues all the time about, okay, we talked to the target, this is what they said, what should we do next? And so we have these kind of conversations, and whenever you have an informant, entrapment is always an issue. And so there's a lot of discussion with agents, and agents, you know, are pretty knowledgeable about how much is too much. You can't push somebody too far.
We have a problem with FBI tactics. Do we take it to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney?
You can take it to the FBI or to the U.S. Attorney's Office. There's a lawyer for the FBI. The title is CDC, Chief Division Counsel, and they are sort of the in-house lawyer for the FBI, and they're in charge, among other things, of sort of policing the FBI as a legal matter, and so they're in a position to take that information, but so are we. Okay, thank you very much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
I don't know if you guys realize, as you hear Ben speak, really how genuine he is as a person, how sincere he is, and how much he's really trying to help this community. So all of us, I hope we appreciate what he's doing for us, and let's continue to take advantage of this education process. We will post all this on our website, God willing, and let the community know and listen to it. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, all of you, for coming. Really appreciate it. And thanks. And we do have some refreshments outside for you. Before you go, I hope you can enjoy some of them.